Welcome to the Virtual Coaching Network for Mathematics. I'm April Forts, and I work at the Iowa Department of Education, and I'm the math consultant for the DE. In December, for this webinar, we are going to talk about Smarter Balance and some of the resources that we have on the Iowa Core site that can help us as educators do our work across the state. Many of us across the state, including myself, when I was in the classroom, we've done a lot of work around the standards. And some of us have used different models: priority, power, unpacking, essential. There's lots of different models out there. And we all had a desire to dig deeper and find out what the standards really meant. So today we're going to talk about how do our standards connect to assessment. So on the Iowa Core website under summative, that contains Smarter Balanced information. And our focus here through the Standards and Curriculum Bureau is always on instruction. So we have some classroom resources there that educators have been using in the field, and I hope that they can be of use to more of you. The resources list characteristics of Smarter Balance, which include the domain, targets, standards, DOK for depth of knowledge, vertical alignments, achievement level descriptors, evidence required, vocabulary responses, vocabulary, response types, materials, attributes, question types, and question bank examples. On the website, we have taken the information that was contained in multiple documents of the Smarter Balance work that they did with how they defined what these standards look like. And we took that and we tried to put it in a user-friendly educator tool that as a classroom teacher, if I was looking, well, what does this standard look like and how might it be assessed, I would have access to that information. So we put it in grade level bands, and in some of the documents from Smarter Balance, it's in grade bands. So for example, 3 through 5 might be all chunked together. So what we did is we pulled that information out. So as a third grade teacher, I'm only looking at third grade material, and I don't have to sort through the 4th and 5th grade material. We did it all the way up through grade 8 and also for high school. Now some in the field in Iowa have asked, well, what about K2? And as a state lead, I work with the other state leads in the other states, and we get together 4 times a year. And because many of us have the same needs, we are actually working together along with AIR, the American Institute of Research, and they've done a lot of work on assessment themselves in the standards. And so what we're doing is we're starting with 3rd grade and we're working backwards. So we're hoping that by the end of the school year in 2017, that we will have those documents available for K-12. Also on this PowerPoint, you will find targets and claims, and we will go deeper into these in another session, but I wanted to put them out there so that if you are curious about them, you can go to them as well. And all of these are hyperlinked, so we can go to those. We do have some information about scoring, and so we can also go into the different scoring tools for the achievement levels and scale scores and see how that works. Another resource that might help you is to take a practice test, and this just might give you a sense of the rigor, the focus, and the coherence that the assessment offers. So let's go ahead and go into one of our documents. Now before we get started, we need to go to the Iowa Core website, and we need to look at our standards for a minute. So we would go to iowacore.gov and under Iowa Core Standards, and then I can select and browse by math. You'll see my name and my information over here. And we're just going to start with the 3rd grade. All of the frameworks are the same, so you'll be able, for whatever level you're teaching at, to be able to find your information likewise. So when we look at the 3rd grade standards, we know that these are the domains. And I can go into the domains to see the further breakdowns. Another thing is the standards for mathematical practices. And these are kind of the process standards. These are how students make sense of the math. So we've got make sense of problems and persevere in solving them, reason abstractly and quantitatively, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others, model with mathematics, use appropriate tools strategically, attend to precision, look for and make use of structure, look for and express regularity in repeated reasoning. So I'm going to go back. So that's where you would find our standards of mathematical practices. So we said that these are our domains, and I'm going to pick operations and algebraic thinking. And when I go into operations and algebraic thinking, I see further headings. And if you're looking at the paper or the online document instead of on the website, you'll see that these are in bold, and we call these clusters of our standards. So when we use our standards framework, we call these clusters. So I'm going to pick the first cluster here, represent and solve problems involving multiplication and division. And when I go into this cluster, I see that there are 4 standards, 4 individual standards. They're also listed over here. And so if I back out, I'll see understand properties of multiplication and relationship between multiplication and division. This is our second cluster within this domain. And you'll see that there's 2 standards here. They're also listed over on the side, and you'll see that this is our third standard, our third cluster, and our 4th cluster. So you can also navigate over here, and there we go. And you'll see that there's 1 standard in there. So whenever we talk about standards, we talk about them using clusters. Also, you'll notice that right here, supporting information for target C, this is your connecting information for your assessment targets. So when we talk about assessment, we talk about it in terms of assessment targets, right? What are the things we want to hit? So standards we cluster together, and targets, those are the things we wanted to hit. The nice thing about this is those are connected. So the standards that are in a cluster, the individual standards that are in a particular cluster, will also be the standards that are in my assessment target. This is not to say that when you teach your units in the classroom that you're going to break it down this way. And that's okay. So we're going to go back to here. And so again, I said that these were listed by grade bands. Well, individual grades, right? Not like a 3-5 grade band. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the Iowa Core website and show you how to get to this information. So to get to those standards, I went to the Iowa Core Standards. And now to get to the resources, I'm going to go to the Educator Resources. Under the Educator Resources, you'll see that this opens up and we have mathematics. And I'm going to select that because as the math consultant, that's our page. And then I'm going to go down to assessment and go over here to summative. Now this was the page where I was saying that this is where we put our Smarter Balance stuff. Over here on the right hand side, you can see we have supports for development and design. And for those of you that really want to do a deep dive into that information, you would look here. Smarter Balance also has some resources such as the blueprints, the content claims, the practice test is listed here. And so what we did is we took all the information out of here and then we put it into grade levels for educators. That additional information into the targets and the claims are below. And this is that scoring information that I mentioned. We'll get into these on later webinars. So for today, we're going to talk about Claim 3 or Grade 3 targets. And I put defined because this is how those people that worked on the Smarter Balance consortium, this is how they defined them. And one of the interesting things is that we know there was a group of people that wrote our math standards. And then what they did is when Smarter Balance received the federal funds to write an aligned assessment, they went back to some of the members of that same group and said, hey, we need to understand deeper, what did you mean by this standard and how might that look as an assessment item and what's the rigor there? And so they work together. So for that reason, that's one of the key reasons why Smarter Balance has received such great reports on being an aligned assessment, is because they worked with the author of the standards. Now, roughly 15 states use Smarter Balance. About 10 use Park, and Park did the same thing. They went to the authors and worked with them. And so you'll see they're very similar. And what do the other 25 states do? Well, some of them have commissioned other vendors, have paid other vendors large sums of money to create a test similar to Park, similar to Smarter Balance, because they understand that those are aligned. And so then they paid another organization, and there's many of them across our country, to write a test that they could put their state name on. Now, when Smarter Balance was developed, it was developed under federal funds, and all the states collaborated on it together. And if you want more information about the research that they use, the over 200 different educational organizations that helped vet this, the leaders that helped do all this work, I can get that to you. Just let me know. It's contained in the content specifications. So what makes Smarter Balance cost money? Well, that's a vendor, because while the Smarter Balance test itself doesn't cost anything, because all of us collaborated together and it's through a consortium, you always need someone to administer the test. So you need somebody who's going to be able to collect the data, make sure the software stays up to date, generate those reports, all those things. And those are called a vendor. And because we live in the digital age, vendors, it's just expensive because it's all tech work, right? So it's kind of similar to the MAPS assessment. The MAPS assessment that is given by NWEA, and then they control all that data and push it back out to schools. It's the same thing. That's why you have to pay for it. So that's what costs for Smarter Balance. And I know some of those questions have been going, people have been asking those questions, and so I wanted to address some of those. So the first thing that you're going to find when you come to the grade 3 targets defined under mathematics is you're going to see some more vocabulary. And this is where you're going to see claim 1 items, claim 2, claim 3, claim 4. So let's take a minute and look at what a claim 1 is. Claim 1 are your content standards. So those are your standards that are going to be assessed, that are in your Iowa core standards, right? So when you look at the content standards, we call those claim 1 standards. And it's A through K, they letter them, and that's the same number of clusters that we have in the Iowa core. So then they said, well, those are just the content standards, but we have all these standards for mathematical practices, and what do we do? And so they kind of looked at them and said, oh, there seems to be 3 themes here: problem solving, communicating reasoning, and modeling for data analysis. So those 8 standards for mathematical practices that we just looked at, those are contained within these 3 claims here, claim 2, 3, and 4. And if you go into the deep dive into the claims, you'll see which specific standards for mathematical practices correspond to each of these claims. You'll see the attributes listed here, and then you'll see this paragraph, and all that says is that a group of standards might be assessed under a certain claim, but if they didn't give us a question, then we didn't put the question. We didn't have a question to put there as an example. So don't assume that we're not going to assess it under that claim. And we're actually going to be cleaning this up and making a facilitation guide, because we realize that this is kind of text heavy. It's hard to read. And educators are just asking for more information about this. So we're going to be updating this page, and you'll have a facilitation guide along with some tools that if you've done some of that priority work or power standards, that you can look at what you've done in your curriculum and see how am I matching up to my assessment targets. So you'll notice that these are those same cluster headings that we looked at in the standards. So in my domains here, you'll see I have the 4 that we looked at under the first cluster, 2 in my second cluster, 1 in my third cluster, and the last 2 within this domain of OA are in my fourth cluster within my standards. However, when we talk about them in targets, we talk about them as A, B, C, and D. Now, you might be wondering, what is this M squared? It's really not M squared. It's just the 2 goes down to the bottom of the page, and it tells you what that is. And what's this S? So for those districts that have worked with the Achieve the Core, these pages, what Smarter Balance did, is also aligned to PARC and also aligned to the Achieve the Core. So if in your districts you've used the Achieve the Core and you've done work around the major and the supporting standards, then that's what these M's and S's are. Smarter Balance also uses P's for priority, and major clusters and priority clusters are the same. So, and the supportings are just the supporting. So let's go ahead and pick this one and look at the different attributes within here. Now, something I should mention before we go any further, because this has been an area of confusion across the state, is the DOK levels. The DOK levels that you will find in the Iowa Core are only for the content standards, and that's around skills and procedures. Claim 1s are skills and procedures. So that should intuitively make sense to us why the DOK levels are usually around a 1 or 2, because skills and procedures are really lower on the DOK level. Does that mean that we're only going to assess those standards at a DOK level? No. We can assess them all the way up to a DOK level of 4. Well, what does that look like? We get into the higher DOK levels within claim 2 through 4. That's where we take the standards for mathematical practices and we actually embed the content into it. So that's where I'm solving a problem that has the skills and procedure that's within that problem are from the content standards. Maybe I'm explaining some reasoning. The standards in there are going to be from the content standards. But when I use my standards for mathematical practices, it has a higher cognitive demand, so my DOK level increases. So let's go back down and look at Target A for 3rd grade. And we click on the PDF, and you'll see that it opens up. And I'm going to just move this out of the way here so we can navigate a little bit easier. And so we have all the things listed. These blue hyperlinks are actually hyperlinks to help you navigate within the document. So say I've been to this document, I've already looked at this information, and I say, oh, I want to go to claim 1. And so then it will take me down to where claim 1 starts. Notice that this has a DOK level of 1. Again, that's for my concepts and procedures, my skills and procedures. Okay, I'm going to get to those higher DOK levels within my different standards for mathematical practices. So you'll see that we've listed the domain. We've listed the target heading, which will match the cluster heading in your standards. We've listed the standards that are included in this target. We've listed out those standards. We wanted to make this a one-stop shop document for educators. So the vertical alignment is here. So this is where if I'm in the classroom, I can say, okay, what's my students' prior knowledge? What did they learn in 2nd grade that I can build on? Because maybe if I'm a 3rd grade teacher, I've never taught 2nd grade. When I was a high school teacher and I hadn't taught 8th grade yet, it was hard for me to kind of know what their prior knowledge was. But then when I went and taught 6th through 8th grade for a while and went back to the high school, it was so much easier because I had an understanding of that. Then it will also give you the 4th grade standards. So what are the things that your colleagues, when those students move on next year, what are the things that they're going to build on with their 4th grade standards? Then we go to something called achievement level descriptors. Achievement level descriptors are a way to measure, how do I know if the student's work is proficient or not? Well, if the student's work or ability is at a level 3, we say that that's proficient. And if they're proficient within this target, this assessment target, which aligns to my standard cluster, if a student is a level 3, then the student should be able to select and use appropriate operation, multiplication, or division within 100 to solve one-step problems involving measurement, quantities of a single digit, whole numbers, and determine the unknown number in a division equation relating to 3 whole numbers. They should be able to interpret the meaning of whole number quotients of whole numbers. So what this helps me to know is if a student is a 3, then they're proficient on those 4 standards up above, right? 4 is exceeding proficiency, and 1 and 2 are maybe not yet proficient, far from proficient. Lots of different frameworks use lots of different vocabulary. So I'm confident that you'll be able to adjust to whatever framework you're using for your standards in curriculum work. Now, the evidence required is super powerful. This is, what do I need? What's my evidence that I'm going to use to decide if a student is a 2, a 3, or a 4? Okay, so when people make a claim about something, oh, I claim that this student is proficient. Well, where's your evidence? Well, my evidence is this. I can somehow, through the activities, lesson, projects, whatever strategy you're using for your practice, this is the evidence that you're collecting from the student to make that determination if they're proficient or not. So what this kind of does, this framework, kind of helps us to make it into bite-sized chunks. One of the things with assessment is, and Smarter Balance, at the training they share this, that if they did the study to see if they assessed every individual standard in the 3rd grade, how long would that assessment be? That assessment would be like 13 hours. So what we do is we look at assessment targets. And those of you may be working with science or social studies people, you've also heard that term of bundling. So our assessment targets are that same concept of bundling. We have the vocabulary, we have the appropriate response type, the materials. These are the things I'm going to have my students explore with or do their work with, right? We have arrays, equal group models, drawings, graphics of measuring tools, scale, balance, measuring cup. Attributes. These are, what are the characteristics of the numbers that I'm going to be working with, right? Because if we're working with 3rd graders, we don't want huge numbers. We don't want them getting stuck on those because they don't really have that number sense about larger numbers just yet. So for this one, the attributes are numbers required to solve multiplication or division problems must be within 100 and use single-digit factors because that would be appropriate for 3rd graders. So we get to our first claim, which is our procedures. It's a DOK1. So claim 1, our students can explain and apply mathematical concepts and carry out mathematical procedures with precision and fluency. Again, it has a DOK of 1. And we list the evidence required. Notice up above we had 2 evidence required. That was for the whole assessment target. But for this individual section, we're just using one of the pieces of evidence. We only need to collect this part from the student. And then we have the different question types that would fall under that evidence. So the student is presented with one-step word problems for a situation involving an array composed of objects familiar to 8 to 9-year-olds. And then we have different question stems. We have a rubric, and we have a response type. Then we go to a second question type, and we have some examples, a third question type. So I might have multiple question types within one claim one soliciting that evidence. It might take me multiple question types to find all the evidence to where I can really know if a student's proficient on that. Now we go to the next standard of 4, again, DOK 1. Now this is a different piece of evidence. So this evidence corresponds with that 4th standard. So we have a question type, another one. So in this particular, to assess this 4th standard, I need 2 different question types so that I have enough evidence and the appropriate evidence so I can say whether or not that student's proficient. Now I go to claim 2, which are problem solving. Now this is where we're not thinking about content first. This is where we're thinking about our standards for mathematical practices, and we're embedding that content into it. So here, this is an example. So in claim 2 questions say students can solve a range of complex, well-posed problems in pure and applied mathematics, making productive use of knowledge and problem-solving strategies. So for example 1, Stephen is baking cupcakes. A cupcake pan has 3 rows with a place to put 4 cupcakes in each row. He filled 2 pans completely and part of another one. How many cupcakes could Stephen have made? Enter the number and the response type. So we can see our content standards embedded into our problem-solving process. We can see that we're using multiplication here. Rubric, the student enters a whole number between 25 and 35 inclusive. We have the sophistication to allow computers to make complex video games and other programs that solve huge problems around the world. So we now have the technology to where students do not have to enter just one correct answer. They can enter answers within a range that would be correct and still be graded. There's another one. What's the fewest number? Here's another example of a problem solving. And then we get to claim 3. So claim 3 is about communicating reasoning. So under this claim, students can clearly and precisely construct viable arguments to support their own reasoning and critique the reasoning of others. So we have some different types of questions here. And this is just to give you an idea of the rigor and the focus and the coherence. Claim 4 is the modeling and data analysis. And for those questions, students can analyze complex real-world scenarios and can construct and use mathematical models to interpret and solve problems. And then here's the problem with the rubric for part A, for part B. Again, we have sophisticated enough computer systems that they can grade this accordingly. Now, I wanted to go back here just to touch base a little bit on the deep dive into the targets and into the claims. On this target, for those of you that are wondering, let me open this up, and we're just going to look at 3rd grade. So claim 1 targets. You'll see that under the priority clusters, we have these letters listed. These are the same letters from the previous page. So these are all the ones that will have an M on the previous page, or we say these are our priority clusters. Again, we talk about it in assessment by clusters, not in standards. And then we have the ones that are in the supporting clusters. Notice our DOKs are 1 and 2. CAT means computer adaptive testing, and PT are performance tests. Now, a point of clarity, When you think about this, think about that these are priority clusters and these are supporting clusters. So it would make sense that students receive more assessment items on the priority clusters than they do on the supporting clusters. I've had some educators ask me, oh, well, there's 5 here, so that's why those are priority. No. These are the priorities, so this is why we're going to have the majority, about 14 questions out of the 20, that are going to come from our priority clusters, and maybe 4 or 5 that come from our supporting. Now, when we get to the claim 2 through 4, you'll notice, wait a minute, this isn't content targets. Correct. So under the problem solving, you'll see that we have assessment targets A through D, and these will relate to problem solving. Then under modeling and data analysis, we have A through G. These will relate to modeling and analyzing data. And then under communicating reasoning, A through F, these will align with communicate reasoning. Notice over here, this is where we're getting that depth of knowledge up to that 2 through 4. And I've had many educators say to me, like, so we're assessing students at a DOK level 4 in 3rd grade? Yes. These pages are the last thing on this section that I'll share with you. And this is just another way to look at the information that I've already shared with you. So this is taking kind of from the standards going to the assessment. So it's just a flip view. So if I think about my domain, I know that I have these 4 clusters. These are my clusters, see the 4, 2, 1, and 2 that are contained in my standard clusters. And these letters correspond to those assessment targets. So we said that target A was represent and solve problems involving multiplication and division. B and C are aligned. Now, what's the difference between the dark blue and the light blue? Well, the dark blue are your major clusters, your priority clusters, and the light blue are your supporting clusters. You'll notice that we do not assess all of the standards or all of the clusters and all of the claims. So for this cluster or target A, we only assess it in claim 1, 2, and 4. For B, we're only assessing it under claim 1 and claim 3, because not all of them lend themselves to appropriately be communicating or modeling or things like that. But what you will notice as I scroll through this page, everything in 3rd grade can be assessed. Okay? So this can help guide some of your work as you're working on these things this year. So let's go back. The last thing, and I'll just touch base on this here, is the rubric that they put out for the achievement levels. They explain here why we use assessment targets and not assessment standards. And the big reason is because they say use of a fine-grained description would risk a tendency to atomize the content, which might lead to assessments that would not meet the intent of the standards. What they're meaning by that is they're saying, well, if we just look at the standard individually without the standards for mathematical practices, we're looking only at DOK 1 and 2. We're just looking at those skills and procedures. And so they said it's important to keep in mind the importance of developing items and tasks that reflect the richness of the math within our standards. And so we'll deep dive into this at a later time, but I know I've been asked for all of this different work. And so you can look through here and learn more about the different grade bands. And then this is the achievement level descriptors for target A. And remember that this is thinking about all of that whole entire target with the standards for mathematical practices, right? So we want students to be able to solve problems and communicate and model and all of those great things. And so this is the target claims. Oh, one other thing I should talk to you about is the claims. And so this is where you can go to this document to learn more about the claims individually and see which mathematical practices are aligned to which of the different claims. And the last thing on here, we talked about this and we talked about that, is our June professional development flyer. And this is where we're going to begin our initiative to really talk about our practice in mathematics. And practice is different than strategies. For example, my family practices having dinner every evening, but we use different strategies. We might go out to eat, that might be a strategy. Another strategy is we might order in for a pizza, I might cook, we might have leftovers, it might be cold cereal night. So this is going to be huge, and we have many educators already in the state of Iowa registered for this. We have about 550, and I would highly encourage you to talk to your team and come either on the secondary day or the elementary day, and we're going to have a lot of additional supports as far as IC maps and facilitation guides and book study information. So when you go back to your districts, there's modules, and this is going to be professional learning for several years to come. So again, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. If you're doing work or you're like, has somebody already done this work? Let me know. I can put you in touch with your AEA consultant. If they don't have it, then I can network higher and say, who has this work and how can we facilitate that? My role really at the Iowa Department of Education is support. There's only one of me, so my role is to take you from the unaware to the conscious. What is it that can support the great work that you're doing in this field, and how can I support that? But it really comes back to the instructional coaches and your AEA support to help you take that to the implementation and the refinement level. That's it. Thanks for attending. Bye-bye.